Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of UI5ers Live. Today we have the following topics to cover. First up, we have Doug Wu with us. Doug will be introducing us to the new UI5 table component, not to be confused with the UI5 table controls. He will be explaining the API and structure, showcasing its features, and also demonstrating how you can integrate it into your projects. So welcome, Doug.
Thanks for having me.
After that, get ready for a deep dive into controller extensions, specifically in the context of TypeScript. Andreas Kunz will walk us through the various options and techniques with expert support from Marius Freitag, who will share insights specific to SAP Fiori Elements projects. So welcome both, Andreas and Marius.
Hi.
And supporting us with his expertise on these topics is Peter Müßig.
Hi, everyone.
And I'm Margot Wolny, your host for today. So that's all for the introduction. Let's jump right in. Doug, now it's your stage.
Yeah, thanks again for having me. Today I will show you the new web component table that has been introduced with UI5 Web Component 2.0. And to not waste any time, we'll jump right into the topic. Here's a small agenda of what we will talk about today. First of all, the question is, of course, why are we even introducing a new web component table? So talk a bit about the motivation behind it. We will talk about the API structure that has been renewed, the different features that are currently available, where you can find the UI5 Web Component table, as well as then a hands-on session on how to quickly migrate from V1 Web Component table to V2 Web Component table. And of course, there's no showing a new web component without showing what the expectations are for the future. So the motivation for essentially all of this, creating a new web component table, revamping the whole API, were 3 points. The most important point probably is accessibility. It was subpar to the product standards of essentially UI5, and we wanted to kind of revamp all of that and focus on accessibility when creating a new web component table. So we decided to tackle the problem of the missing keyboard support and the not ideal announcements on ARIA labeling. A second motivation point for us was to harmonize the web components table with our UI5 tables, essentially having some kind of feature parity in that regard. Another point, the third point, the last point, is that we have a clean slate then to improve existing APIs, and we can incorporate new ideas into this whole new web component table. And to come to the API structure, we were heavily inspired by the HTML table, which you can see on the left. You have the table tag, you have a TR tag, and you have TH tags for the columns or the table headers. And then in subsequent TR tags, you have TD tags, which are the cells that can be rendered to the web page. And we follow a similar structure for the new web component table API. Essentially, we've got our UI5 table, which is the web component table. And we have a UI5 table header row, which essentially is a special row which contains TH elements. In our case, TH elements are UI5 table header cells. And our TD elements are our UI5 table cells. So very, very similar to the API structure of the HTML table. We thought it might make sense to have this familiarity in that regard. And this structure also opens up a lot of possibilities for us to expand upon in the future. To come to some base features that the web component table offers, we have an overflow mode. You can either have scrolling, so when the table would overflow, it renders an internal horizontal scroll bar where you can scroll left and right in the table, or you can enable pop-in mode, which is, if you already worked with UI5 tables, just puts columns that do not fit into the view area into the pop-in area. We have interactive rows and the row press event or row click event for the web component table. We have keyboard handling like in UI5. Just to have a quick look here in our table. Previously, we were only able to do up and down. Now, if I press arrow right, I can also focus cells now, similar to UI5 tables. So we've adjusted our keyboard handling here as well. You have sticky rows or sticky header rows, and you have a navigated indication. And these features are all already available with the required imports that you need anyways to create a web component table, table header row, table header cell, table row, and table cell. And you might think to yourselves now, well, where's selection, where's growing? And that's coming now because we wanted to, instead of putting that all into the base table, we wanted to provide you a way to extend your table along the way. So if you do not need selection, we don't want to force selection onto you. We want to give you the opportunity to say, well, I need selection now. Let's plug and play or extend my table to have selection. And essentially provide you with an easy way to add features to a table. And that's what we did. We implemented a plug and play approach where you can use features if you actually need them. You can have different versions of a feature. For example, in selection cases, you might want to have index-based selection. You might want to have key-based selection, and so on and so forth. And the whole idea of this concept is also to allow you as a user of a web component table to create your own custom features in the future. And this is all combined in the web components table under the features concept. Essentially, we have a feature interface that needs to be implemented for all applicable features. And the current public features that we offer are table selection and table growing. So currently you can extend your table to have selection or growing capabilities. And these features are put into the feature slot of the table. So it looks like something like this. You have your UI5 table tag, and then you can have your UI5 table selection, and you slot it into your feature slot. And then with that, you have your table extended with selection, which is quite nice. The UI5 Web Components table, or V2, is currently available with UI5 Web Components 2.0. You can find it in the official documentation already. And it is also available for React with UI5 Web Components, the wrapper implementation for React. You can find the usage here on NPM. It's not in the documentation yet, but you can also already try it out using the recent NPM package. And with that, I want to quickly jump into the migration part of all of this. I've prepared a small little application here. You see a map here, and you see a couple of city bike vendors. And if I click on a row here, for example, Ekobiki, which is located in Buenos Aires, it focuses this city or this city and this bike vendor on my map. And I can jump around the world. As fun as I am, I can go to Innsbruck, and if I wanted to, I could mark Innsbruck. If I wanted to jump back to it in a later stage to just remember it, so I can, for example, choose these two as well. And if I go back to my world view, you'll see that I have a couple of maps now on my world map, which are kind of cluttered now because they're very close together. But as you can see, I just have now a map to kind of remember where my different city bike vendors are. And this app has been built with React. I'm using Leaflet as a map, and I'm using a UI5 Web Component table as a table, specifically the React wrapper for that whole thing. And now we do not want to use the V1 version of our UI5 Web Component table. We want to upgrade our table to the V2 version or 2.0 version, to the current version of the UI5 Web Component table. And the first step of all of this is to, of course, update all our dependencies. So let's do that while I go through the application and shortly show you what is currently here. So the most important part is this app.tsx file, because I've put everything into here. And essentially, we've got the top bar, which contains, let's restart this again real quick. I have my top bar, which contains my map. And the most important thing here is I have my table, which has essentially all the features that I want enabled. So I have growing, I have an event listener, I have my button subtext, I have my selection mode set, I have a selection listener, I have a row click event listener, and so on and so forth. I have my columns, and I have my templates for my table rows. As you can see here now, we have all of our dependencies updated now, and you see already we have some errors. And the first thing you might notice is that it underlines table column red. So you'll see that if I hover over it, has no export member table column, because table column does not exist in the new world. We've replaced that with table header row. If I write it correctly, and table header del. And now the imports are correct, but we still have a couple of issues. If I scroll back down here, you'll see that growing is underlined red. If I hover over it again, you'll also see that these properties do not exist on this new table. So let's just remove all the properties that do not exist on our table. You'll see onload more also does not exist. Growing button subtext also does not exist. Mode does also not exist. On selection change does also not exist. And columns do not exist as well, because the changes, the table by default, so the base table has no selection, has no growing, and the column has been renamed, or columns have been renamed to header row. So let's do that, header row, and put our table header row in here. Ooh. And I've got GitHub Copilot enabled, so it's really nice. It already suggests me what table header cells to put in here, so let's do that. We've got a vendor, city, company, and country, similar to what we had before. And if I change the type here, if I hover over it again, it says, well, this also does not exist on the table row, so let's remove it for now and have a look at it later on. And if I go back here and I refresh, you'll see I have it working table. And that's pretty much it. I had to change a bit of coding, but with just these couple of lines, I'm able to render a table, which is quite nice. Now, let's tackle the missing features, right? We cannot click on rows yet. We have no growing, we have no selection. So let's tackle those problems. To enable a row pressing or row clicking, we need to provide a row click event or row click event listener, which we already have on row click. And we need to make the table row interactive. If we do that, you'll see these table rows are interactive. I can click on them and you'll see it already works. We can jump around the world as much as we want. It already works. Great. Now let's tackle the problem of growing. To enable growing, we need, of course, the feature which enables growing, which is table growing. So let's import that. And let's add a feature into the feature slot and ascend to this features property. And let's add table growing. And we want table growing to be type button. And we want to, of course, need to provide a listener or load more event listener to essentially have a callback where we can add more rows, which is then onload more. So let's add onload more here. And if we refresh again, you'll see I have a growing button, more, and if I click on it, more rows are added. That's all we need to do to enable growing. So let's tackle selection. Again, I need to import the appropriate feature for that, table selection. Let's add it to all of this. And a selection, of course, needs some kind of, again, event listener when the selection has changed. So in this case, it's not called onSelectionChange, it's called onChange, because it's already part of a table selection, so we do not need the selection prefix there. And we just put onSelectionChange in here. And if I refresh again, you'll see we have some a couple of checkboxes where we can now select. If I select, I'm getting an error because we need to change a bit in onSelectionChange. Because as of now, we are just to get also the selected rows, we access selected rows or event detail selected rows. That's not possible anymore because this event does not have any parameters. So what we need to do in this case of a web component table, this table selection has a property called selected, which allows us to essentially provide keys or row keys that are selected. This is also something I forgot. You need to correctly select, you need to provide a so-called row key, which in our case can be a vendor ID, which is just a unique key to essentially allow the, for example, selection to uniquely identify a table row. So I could go ahead and could write in here some kind of, this is my key, this is my unique key. And if the table would have such a table row with this unique key, this row would be selected. So we just need to access that selected properties. So let's do that, and by using useref. So we need to use ref. No, we need to attach the reference to the table selection. What was it called? Selection. I need also to import useref. That's right. Quick fix, update, import. And then I can go in here. I can just do selection.current. That's selected. And then I can just get all my selected keys, ideally. And because it's a string, which is space separated, I could just call split. And because it's TypeScript, it's complaining a bit. So let's do all of this here. Selection from ref, I think it's called. No, so let's do a, sorry for that, if selection at current. We'll just check if this is actually existing. If not, we just return and do nothing. And if we do that, we also need to change all of this because it's not a row anymore that we get row keys, so we do not need this row.id. And if we do that, you see selection works, and I can select stuff out of the box, and we have all the features that we had before, right? So that's pretty neat. And that's pretty much all the things you need to do for this migration. The selection part is a bit bigger, but that's due to the implementation of onSelectionChange. If you implemented it differently, then you might have even less workload to do. So let's jump right into after this migration, into the expectations for the future. We are currently developing and have planned quite a lot of features. Currently in development are horizontal alignment, row actions. We are planning to implement or provide drag and drop support for the different rows and columns. We are we have a high priority on virtualization, essentially all of this concept of virtualizing your data. We have a POC running already and are in the steps of finalizing that POC. And we're also working on row highlights and even more features. Yeah, so be excited for a lot of new features that are coming. And the most important part that I want to highlight in this presentation is the experimental API, which means you can give us feedback. Your feedback matters. Essentially, this web component table is for you. And I think, or we think that it can be the best if you provide your feedback, you raise your voice, and you get into discussions with us. That way we can make the table even better.
I will definitely do so, especially if we are now thinking of the seamless integration of web components into UI5. So it's not only a thing we do for React or for other frameworks, it's also one thing we do for our SAP UI5 and Open UI5 framework at the end to come to one consistent table implementation across all stacks. Yeah. And this is one of the starting of that initiative, and it's already great to see how many things are working here. And I will definitely give feedback.
I'm excited for that feedback.
Are there any questions from someone to that, or can we continue?
No, I also cannot see any question yet, but thanks a lot. Look, it was really a great presentation. Really enjoyed it. So, but the next topic is also quite exhausting. So let's go really to the next topic and to Andreas and Marius.
Yeah, now to something completely different. Controller extensions are a mechanism how, in general, you can add functionality to existing controllers, or how functionality can be added to controllers in UI5. And there's some documentation in the demo kit, obviously. Most based on JavaScript, but we have added TypeScript information about it because some things that you do in JavaScript here, when the class is converted in TypeScript to regular ES classes, are things like overwrite don't work anymore because they would then collide with protected keywords, or things like this usage or reuse of an extension here. This is also something that cannot be written, especially when you also want to overwrite some parts. So all in all, they have been working over the past months on enabling also controller extensions when using TypeScript. And this is now done, and I'm going to present the result of all of that. So first and foremost, controller extensions basically have two flavors. As I said, they add functionality to controllers, but there are two use cases that are pretty distinct. So one is some others have implemented a controller. For example, there's an SAP standard application that you cannot or want not modify. And you apply your own controller extension to this controller from somebody else to modify the behavior. And the other use case is the other way around. You write your own controller, but you want to reuse functionality provided by others that they provide in the form of a controller extension. And we will see both of them. So it's slightly different how you use them, but basically it's always adding functionality to controllers. So those reuse controller extensions, some are provided by Fiori elements, you will see them later. They could automatically hook in or override parts of your controller to add some functionality, or you can use this and additionally adapt how the overriding works. Maybe there are some hooks to implement. In some other cases, they provide functionality you can actively call. So it totally depends on the type of the extension, what exactly, how it is used. And in general, so either you write an extension to modify controllers, or you have a controller and reuse an extension to add functionality to your own code, to your own controller. So that's the two use cases. And let's dive right into the first one. So I have a standard application here. This is exactly what is generated by the EasyUI5 generator. The totally standard application that looks like this. This is when you just say, okay for everything that the EasyUI5 proposes for the TypeScript application for each. So yo, EasyUI5 TS app, then you get this application. And this is what we have in this original folder here. It's an index.html, controller, components, and so on. And to extend this application without modifying it at all, you can use this controller extension mechanism. In this case, you create your own application by creating your own index.html, for example. So if you run in Launchpad, you don't need that, but run them directly. And here you launch your own extension component. This component doesn't need to have much content, actually no content at all. It's just that there's an entity that holds your application, so to say. And the thing is that it extends the original component. So original component is the component in the original application. You just extend it, and then you have a connection, so to say, set up. And the component comes with the manifest JSON configuring it. You also don't need any content. The content is all coming from the original application. You only need this block where you say, okay, now I want to register an extension. Otherwise, the application would be just exactly the same. In the SAP UI5 block of the manifest.json of your extension application, you say extensions, controller extensions, so it's a bit of a cascade, and you say you want to extend this original controller with this name with your own extension, which, well, for historic reasons, you say controller name, and for historic reasons, you also have to name it .controller.ts to have it found. But what you have there in the main extension is basically a controller extension. And this is how you write it in TypeScript. So as usual, you use ES classes. So inherit by class main extension extends controller extension. So you inherit from the controller extension base class. And then you have this overwrites block. In the JavaScript documentation, it was just overwrite. If you would write overwrite here, then I think there would be an error because, well, in some places, definitely it would be an error because of collisions with a keyboard here in TypeScript. But this is one thing, you call it overwrites, and you define it like this. It's all now in the documentation. And there you can provide the functions you want to either extend, like on init as the standard lifecycle hook, which will be executed before or after, and so on, the original lifecycle hooks. And if you implement other methods, they will right away replace the methods in the original controller. So in the original controller, the message box shows that, what did it show? It said, hello world. And this is what we have. Extension original controller name. So it just said hello world in the say hello function. And all our extension is doing now is just replacing this say hello function with a different implementation. Where you say message box show this message is coming from the extension. So if I now go ahead and launch this index.html, it will load the manifest.json. The component will inherit from the original component, so it will load all the original application, but it will overwrite this one function. And this is what we see when we now go not to original, but to extension index.html. Well, it's already loaded. Just to prove it's real. And if I click here, then this message is coming from the extension. So this shows we have now really executed this function instead of the original one. I'm basically not explaining controller extensions here, but it goes hand in hand. I'm mainly focusing on the TypeScript implementation. And well, yeah, now you see here how this is written and how everything fits nicely together and is typed and so on. So that's the first use case. The second use case is that you have your own controller and you want to add some reuse functionalities, for example, provided by Fiori elements or provided by your colleagues who have a reuse component of some way. And you can do this like this. Again, I have the same application that is now running here. It should be, as soon as I do npm start, should be active. This is again the output of the EasyUI5 application generator for TS app. I have just added two more buttons here. So the first one, say hello, is the same one. But I have added the button, an error button that calls the function trigger error with the argument Houston, we have a problem. And the second one, show warning, that calls show warning. Let's look at the first one now. The trigger error function right now has a debugger statement, so we see when it's called and it logs something to the console. Let's see whether this happens. So trigger error, we should stop here in the debugger. You see we are in debugger, you don't need to read everything. You can still zoom a bit. And we see the error message in the console. Houston, we have a problem. Now let's assume we want to have a reuse component, like a reuse controller extension that handles errors for all your applications. Then you can, for example, implement it like this. You do exactly the same thing again. You inherit from controller extension. You need the constructor. That's for some TypeScript reasons. Otherwise, it couldn't be assigned to the type later on. And in this overrides block, you can again hook into lifecycle functions or override existing stuff. So this reuse component basically has the contract, I will override your trigger error function with a certain API and parameters, and will then provide a nicer handling of the error. How do I apply this reuse extension now in my own controller? It's as easy as this. It's just assigned to a new member variable error handler in this case. You say controller extension.use, and that's a sort of fake for TypeScript. So this is not at this place at runtime. This is just to get the types right, because you assign a class here, but you actually have later on instances of this class. So this is something you have to call, and then just provide the class error handling of the reuse extension. And then this extension is applied. Whatever it overrides will automatically be overwritten. So when I save this page is automatically reloading. And I now click trigger error. Now we get the nice error pop-up because the controller extension has overridden the function. As I said, it could be called in different ways. It could, for example, also explicitly call functionality in the error handler. As I said, error handler is my reuse extension here. I can call functionality on it. So if I say this error handler, display warning pop-up, display warning pop-up is just also a method there in this extension. Then I don't have any implementation in my application for show warning, but still the warning pop-up comes because I delegate, so to say, the call to this reuse extension here. There's another way how you can tweak the extension that you are using. So there are some extensions where you need to provide some callback hooks or some configuration or some kind of that stuff. So you can also override the extension at the same time when you so to say load it or apply it. And this goes like this. You say just class, the controller extension class dot override, and can provide an object which, for example, overrides the functions that are in there. Now, this is an extension overriding a controller, but from the controller, you again override the extension. So I know it's a bit confusing, and if you don't get it right now, it's not so bad. But basically, in the controller extension, now we have a format error function that just writes error in front of the error message. We saw this here, error. And if I want to tweak this reuse behavior a little bit from my controller where I use this error handling, I can override this format error and instead add a more polite prefix to the message. So if I save this and click error again, then we see the polite message. So the controller extension has overridden my trigger error to show a nice pop-up, but I have told it, well, format the error in a slightly different way. And from TypeScript perspective, again, the magic or the things we now provide newly that were not there before are mainly around this controller extension.use function, which is removed when TypeScript is translated to JavaScript. But it was a bit tricky to get like the typing right. So what is here will, from TypeScript perspective, be exactly the thing you expect here. So you can call all the function of your extension here. So the main message is, with TypeScript, you can now use controller extensions in both ways, both variants of usage. How exactly it is used, you have very, very quickly seen it here, also in action, but you can also look it up in the documentation. So in the beginning, I showed you this page here. At the bottom, at least in the nightly version, and coming, I think, with a 1.127, it should be complete, or at latest at 128. There you also see the code again, how it's applied, the different use cases.
Yes, did you? I don't know whether you paid properly attention, but did you mention the controller extension.use? It can also be used in JavaScript, and then we get an error or so. Is this still?
Yeah. So as I said, this controller extension.use is purely a TypeScript construct to get the types right. In JavaScript, this does not even exist. Or, well, we implemented a method that just throws an error and says, I don't exist, and points you, so to say, to the documentation and tells you what's going on. So if, for example, for some reason you forgot the namespace here, then the class will not be transformed maybe to JavaScript, and then this replacing will not happen, then it will still be in the JavaScript. Then you will see an error message saying, oh, this should not be here, somehow it should be removed. Yeah,
but I think exactly that what you showed now, removing this namespace or so, or the name annotation, then this is very often also an issue what we see when people just...
the namespace misses, the class is not properly transformed, and these things do not happen, not only for control extensions, but also some other tweaks. So in short, at one glance again, your extension, extending SAP applications, for example, configure it in manifest, and name the file controller TS, have this overwrites block, and that's it. The other way around, your own controller, you reuse some extension provided, for example, by Fiori elements. You write it like this, an instance variable, control extension.use. You can override it to extend it or just keep it as is. And this is available when you have the current version of the Babel plugin transform modules UI5, or also current version of the UI5 tooling Transpire. Just make an npm upgrade and use the latest version of this plugin, and use the UI5 types. Otherwise, you don't have the controller extension.use method in version 1.127, or some later patches down to 1.120, because it's an important API. We downported this type, but only to, for example, patch 18 of 1.120. All right, I think that was a lot of stuff in a short time. Margaret said it would be overwhelming, so I guess it was. But to see some real-world use cases of controller extensions, I would like to hand over to Marius, who is from Fiori Elements and knows more about controller extensions because they provide some actively.
I will be very quick here. I just want to tell you this is great news. It's not only great news if you create your application completely freestyle, but it's especially great news if you use Fiori Elements for ODW4. If you have built any application with Fiori Elements, especially using the flexible programming model, you might have heard about controller extensions, because we actually use it quite heavily to split up our logic into different modules that can be used independently. And this also helps if you want to have your Fiori Elements application in TypeScript. So as with all the flexible programming model Explorer things, there's this Explorer where you can read documentation and examples on all the things that you might want to do, like building blocks, extension points. And you can also see the controller extensions here, which gives you some examples of what you can do. And just for this quick presentation and to see that it actually works, I took my presentation from DevToberfest 2023 last year, where I'm building an application from scratch using TypeScript, using flexible programming model with building blocks. It's very easy. So if you haven't seen it, I recommend you looking at this. And now, taking this as a basis, we can use this new syntax in TypeScript to also extend functionality. And in this case, for example, I'm taking the routing controller extension, which is from Fiori Elements, takes care of all the routing between different pages. And I can just say, whenever the on-after binding event is called, or the callback is called, I can plug in my own logic. So what you often see in Fiori Elements flexible programming model is this second, more complicated thing that Andreas showed. The reason is that our controller extensions really have a lot of logic inside, and you might want to extend them. And this wasn't possible before. Also in my presentation for DevToberfest, I had to do some other way to make this work, but now we can just use controller extensions also natively in TypeScript. So that's really great. There's also the FPM Explorer. This is also great if you want to get started. This is even live code editor, so you can just change things and see how it behaves in real life. And if you are interested in more specific controller extensions, for example, the routing, the on-after binding that I used, there's also API documentation in the namespace SAP FE controller extensions, where you can see everything that is available and how you can extend it. Yeah, with that, just a very quick reminder that all of this is also applicable to Fiori Elements. It makes it way better to create applications in TypeScript and Fiori Elements. And because of that, a great big thank you to all of you to make this available. So this is really great also for us. And with this, back to you.
Yeah, I think it was really a great session today. I really loved all of those topics. Thanks a lot for the great preparation. Lots of live coding, which we really enjoy. And yeah. And yeah, with this, we are actually at the end of this session. At least I cannot see any questions. But once again, the call for actions from Doug, please have a look at those new features, especially with the web components. Provide your feedback. It's really, really important for us, because otherwise we might go the wrong direction. So really, really have a look at this. But also check out the new controller extension if everything is working as Andreas and Marius explained. And Andreas wants to say something.
One more remark, the documentation that I've shown in the beginning in demo kit will also be extended and polished a bit. So you have now seen a very quick, hopefully good overview, but the documentation, the official one, might get another overhaul also very soon. So it will be even more streamlined.
Yeah, also this, I think that will be highly appreciated by all of our community members. Yeah. And I guess with this, we actually can close for today. Saying goodbye. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.